So lesson 3 is about ecological pyramids. It's just a different way that we can represent the interactions and the types of organisms that are in a food chain or a food web. And there are going to be 3 types of pyramids that we'll look at. The first of them is a pyramid of numbers. A pyramid of numbers illustrates how many organisms are in each trophic level in a particular food chain. So I have 2 examples to illustrate to you how a pyramid of numbers might look. Most of the time, a pyramid of numbers will be what we call upright. In an upright pyramid of numbers, the base is the biggest, and then it gets smaller as you go up each level. So I have a couple of sample food chains there just to illustrate this. But in a lot of pyramid of numbers, you will have many, many producers. There will be a ton of them. And then by the time you go up to the top, there will be very few of whatever carnivore or consumer is at the top of the food chain. So if I were to count, here I have 1, here I have 6, here I have 10, so it's bigger every time we go down. In the next level, I'm pretty sure I have 14, and in the bottom level, I'm pretty sure I have 15. So the number gets smaller as you go up in the food chain. And that is how a lot of food chains look. You have producers that are small but very plentiful, and you have carnivores that are big, but there's not very many of them. Same thing would be true over here, except this is an aquatic example. I'd like to show you as many examples as I can so that you have some ideas for who eats who in a food chain. So over here on the terrestrial one, we start out with a plant, then there's an insect, then a rodent, then a snake, then a bird. That would be a fairly typical looking terrestrial food chain. Aquatically, we have our aquatic plant, small fish, big fish, and then an aquatic bird. Now, I wouldn't expect for you to know the name of every type of animal that exists on Earth. So if you're ever describing a food chain to me and you want to use words like that, aquatic plant, because you can't think of the name of one, small fish, big fish, large bird, you can use general words like that as long as I get a good sense of what the organism is sort of like. The other type of pyramid of numbers you would see is what we call inverted. Now, inverted might not be the best word because inverted seems to sound like it's completely backwards. In an inverted pyramid, we usually mean one level is much smaller than the one above. So in this imaginary food chain where raptors are my top carnivore, I like to mention this because biology isn't just about things that are currently alive, it's about anything that was ever alive. And so for your assignment today, if you were interested in using dinosaurs, by all means, go ahead. They existed, they don't right now, but that doesn't mean that they were not part of a food chain. So at the bottom of this food chain, I have a willow tree, which is incredibly large. When you have a producer that is incredibly large, often one producer can support a huge number of the next level. So if I take a look and I imagine that I have one large willow tree, it's very reasonable to imagine that even 1,000 caterpillars could live on that one willow tree. If you've ever had a willow tree, or my parents used to have a laurel leaf A laurel leaf willow, yeah, that's the kind they had in their backyard. And every spring, there would be so many caterpillars that if you walked outside, they would just fall on you, and the whole patio would be covered with them. And I would squish them on my brother's face, do other mean things like that. It would be realistic to say, for example, that there were a few hundred birds and then maybe only a few raptors. So generally when we say inverted, we don't actually mean the whole thing is upside down. We mean that one level, very often the producer level, is much smaller than the ones that come above it because it's one organism, but it's a really, really large organism. So scientists don't like it when there are exceptions to their rules, so pyramid of numbers didn't work all the time. So we tried next a different type of pyramid. The next type is pyramid of biomass. It illustrates the total mass of each trophic level. So that should get rid of the problem we had with the willow tree, because even though it was one organism, it was very big, so its mass would still outweigh all of those caterpillars. Most of the time, you will see an upright pyramid of biomass. In my example here, I go from 1,000 to 100 to 10 to 1. And you might ask yourself, hey, does a lion really weigh 1 kilogram? That seems very unrealistic. When we take the mass, because we're calling it biomass, we're considering the dry mass of an organism without water, because water will mess things up. And so that's why those numbers maybe look a little bit silly. The other thing that I want you to notice in the upright pyramid that goes from grass to herbivores like a moose or a rabbit, then to a fox, and then a big mountain cat of some kind, is that the numbers get divided by 10 each level. Now that doesn't mean that that's how it is everywhere all the time, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb. Every time you go up a level in the food chain, you usually have 10% of what you had before. It's a pretty good estimation. Now I would say for the most part, terrestrial ecosystems would have upright pyramids of biomass. But there's a really good example of an aquatic ecosystem where the pyramid of biomass would be inverted. The first one shows you an upright pyramid. This would be an example taken from a Florida bog, where you have producers, then consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. We could say that the producers are plants. The primary consumers are, say, small fish. And if we go up, we might even get something like a crocodile as our tertiary consumer. So not all aquatic food chains would be inverted, but there's a pretty specific example of one that would. When the primary producer is phytoplankton, phytoplankton are essentially 100% water. So if you take away water from the calculation, their mass is basically nothing. They have almost no mass at all. So even though there are many of these, and I could draw a pyramid of numbers, and the base would be humongous, if I only consider their mass is basically nothing. Zooplankton are different. Zooplankton are not made up of almost 100% water. So this is a really specific example of an inverted pyramid of biomass. The inverted pyramid of biomass does not happen often. Now, like I said, scientists don't like exceptions to their rules, so since there could be an inverted pyramid of biomass, we had to come up with a final, better idea. And our final, better idea is a pyramid of energy. A pyramid of energy is always 100% of the time, no exceptions, upright. And that's because the energy from one level cannot be more than what came before it if we're following a linear food chain. In this example, I have green plants, and then I have some insects, frogs, and then snakes. If the insects are only getting their energy from the green plant, they cannot possibly have more because energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's impossible. Now remember, in the real world, is one organism only eating one other organism? Probably not. But if we're considering one food chain, one section, it would be impossible for those insects to have greater energy than the plants if that's where their energy came from. So what happens to the energy? It can be lost, in quotations, because remember, it's not really gone. We could use the word wasted, that would be better, as heat. It's used by the organism for its body functions. So we made a huge list a few lessons ago, but these are anything that keeps you alive. So things like muscle contractions, for example. Anything about reproduction, anything about acquiring food or getting rid of waste. Those are all body functions. And some energy can be released in the waste produced. So when you breathe out CO2, some chemical energy is gone because there is chemical energy in the bonds of CO2. So like I said, the standard number is 10%. About 10% of the energy from one trophic level is used in the next one. So regardless of the numbers that you have, I'm going to make a ridiculous number so I can show you. Let's say that that bottom level has 6,827 joules. Capital J is the symbol for joules. It's the unit for energy. Then this level would have 682.7 joules. And that level would have 68.27 joules. And that level would have 6.827 joules. I divided by 10, or I moved the decimal one spot each time. That would make a good numeric response question, because an actual number could be the answer. So because of this, there are limits. There's a pretty hard limit on the number of trophic levels. Usually we would say 6 is about the limit. Now, it's possible that in a big, large food web with lots of interactions, you could have more. But if we're going in a linear fashion, by the time you've divided by 10 6 times, that's like 1,000,000 times different. So the energy is so greatly reduced. There's also a limit to the number and the biomass of organisms at each level, because only so many of them can be supported by that amount of energy.